The air in the St. Jude's Metropolitan ER is a thick soup of antiseptic, stale coffee, and fear. It clings to the back of the throat, a taste Clara Reed could never wash away. For 2 years, she had drifted through these halls like a ghost in beige scrubs, a background character in 100 daily dramas. She kept her head down, her voice low, her movements deliberately slow. It was a camouflage she had perfected. She was Nurse Reed, the clumsy one, the slow one, the one who seemed perpetually lost in a fog. Colleagues spoke to her with a forced, patronizing patience, or, more often, they spoke around her, as if she were a piece of furniture that occasionally got in the way. They saw her mousy brown hair, always pulled back in a severe, unflattering bun. They saw the way her eyes darted away from direct contact. They saw weakness. And in the shark tank of a major city emergency room, weakness was blood in the water. On her worn uniform, just above her ID badge, she wore a small, tarnished pin. It was a Navy Special Warfare insignia, the trident of the SEALs, but with a caduceus entwined around the anchor. It was a flight nurse badge, earned in blood and fire, in screaming desert skies and the deafening roar of helicopter rotors. Here, in the fluorescent glare of St. Jude's, it was a joke. A cheap trinket from a surplus store, they whispered. A pathetic attempt to seem interesting. She never corrected them. She let them believe it. The whispers were part of the camouflage. The apex predator of this particular tank was Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Emergency Medicine. He was a man carved from arrogance and privilege, a brilliant surgeon with hands blessed by God and a soul poisoned by contempt. He moved through the ER not like a healer, but like a feudal lord surveying his domain. His pronouncements were law, his moods the weather that everyone had to endure. And for reasons Clara never understood, he had chosen her as his personal target. She was a stone in his shoe, a nagging reminder of an imperfection he could not tolerate in his perfectly run machine. The day began like any other, with the steady, rhythmic beep of monitors and the low murmur of pain. Clara was restocking a supply cart, her movements careful, measured. Too measured for Finch. He swept around the corner, his expensive Italian shoes making no sound on the linoleum. He was a specter of authority. "Reed, are you decorating that cart or stocking it? We have patients bleeding out, and you're arranging bandages like you're setting a dinner table." His voice cut through the ER chatter, sharp and cold. A few nurses nearby suppressed smirks. Maya, a young intern who was still new enough to possess kindness, shot Clara a sympathetic glance before quickly looking away, terrified of drawing Finch's fire. "Sorry, Dr. Finch, I'm almost done," Clara murmured, her gaze fixed on a box of sterile gauze. Finch snatched a roll of tape from her hand. "Almost done isn't done. Everything with you is almost. You're almost competent. You're almost a nurse. What is this?" He jabbed a finger at the small pin on her uniform, his nail scraping against the tarnished metal. "Still wearing your little toy soldier badge? Did you get it out of a cereal box?" The sycophants laughed on cue, a ripple of cruel amusement. Clara felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. She said nothing. Her silence was a shield, but to him, it was an admission of guilt. "I asked you a question, nurse." She flinched as he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. His grip was surprisingly strong, a casual display of dominance. "Let go of me," she whispered, the words barely audible. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed. "What did you say?" For a split second, something flickered in Clara's eyes. A spark of defiance, hard and ancient. It was the look of a cornered animal, but not one preparing to flee, one preparing to strike. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, smothered by the meek, frightened mask she wore. She pulled her arm away, stumbling back and knocking over a metal tray of instruments. Clang! The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. Scalpels, clamps, and forceps scattered across the floor. It was a symphony of her own incompetence. Finch threw his hands up in theatrical disgust. "Unbelievable. You are a walking disaster, a liability. Clean this up, and get that ridiculous piece of tin off your uniform before you come back on the floor. This is a professional medical institution, not a costume party." He turned and stalked away, the waves of his displeasure parting the staff before him. Clara knelt, her hands trembling slightly as she began to pick up the scattered instruments. She could feel their eyes on her, the pity, the scorn, the relief that it wasn't them. She hid her face, letting her hair fall forward to cover the faint, silvery scar that traced a line from her temple into her hairline, a memory of sand and pressure and a flash of blinding white light. Brenda, a senior nurse with tired eyes and a mortgage, shuffled over and nudged a stray hemostat toward her with her shoe. "Just ignore him, honey," she muttered, not making eye contact. "He's on a tear today." It was the closest thing to support Clara would get. Brenda knew Finch was a bully, but she had 2 years until retirement. She wasn't about to risk it. Clara just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She gathered the last of the tools, her fingers brushing against the cool, familiar shape of her pin. She didn't take it off. She never would. It wasn't a toy. It was a promise. A tombstone. A reminder of who she used to be, and why she could never be that person again. She finished cleaning the mess, her movements becoming fluid and efficient now that no one was watching. The clumsy, slow nurse was a role she played, and she was a very, very good actress. The afternoon brought chaos. A multi-car pileup on the I-5 during a sudden downpour. The ER doors swung open again and again, admitting a tide of broken bodies and panicked cries. The air crackled with urgency. It was the kind of controlled mayhem where Finch thrived, barking orders, making brilliant, life-saving calls, his ego swelling with every successful procedure. Clara faded into the background, doing the necessary, thankless work, changing IV bags, taking vitals, cleaning wounds. She was a cog in the machine, and that was how she wanted it. She was triaging a patient with a simple fractured arm when the paramedics wheeled in the last victim. He was a John Doe, found 30 yards from the main crash site, down an embankment. No wallet, no phone, no identification. He was unconscious, his face a mask of bruises and cuts. But underneath the blood and grime, there was an undeniable aura of power. His body was a roadmap of corded muscle, the physique of a man who treated physical hardship as a daily commute. He didn't fit the profile of a typical car crash victim. Finch, wiping sweat from his brow after setting a compound fracture, strode over to the gurney. He gave the unconscious man a cursory glance, his lip curling in distaste. "Another one? What's his story?" "No idea, Doc," the paramedic said. "Found him like this. No ID. Vitals are all over the place. Tachycardic, but his pressure is dropping. Pupils are sluggish." Finch shone a penlight into the man's eyes. He peeled back a torn shirt sleeve, revealing a series of intricate tribal tattoos. "Probably high on something. The crash likely just finished the job. Another junkie to waste our resources." The judgment was instant. Final. It was Finch's way. He saw a nameless, uninsured man, and his mind was already made up. He scribbled a few notes on the chart. Give him a bolus of saline, run a basic tox screen, and move him to the holding ward. If he wakes up, give him a sedative and discharge him when he's sober. We need this bed. The holding ward was a purgatory for patients without insurance or clear diagnoses. It was where people were sent to be forgotten until they could be pushed out the door. It was a death sentence, delivered with a pen stroke. "Doctor," Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. She had moved closer, her eyes scanning the John Doe, seeing things Finch, in his arrogant haste, had missed. Finch's head snapped up. "What is it, Reed? Do you have an opinion? Did you suddenly graduate from medical school in the last 5 minutes?" She ignored the barb, her focus entirely on the man on the gurney. "His bruising pattern. It's not consistent with blunt force trauma from a crash. It's petechial. And there's a smell. Something acrid, like burnt almonds." Finch actually laughed, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Burnt almonds? Are you a detective now? Or a perfumer? It's called the city, Reed. It stinks. He probably fell into a dumpster. Now do as I say. Move him." He turned his back on her, already focused on the next interesting case, the next opportunity to play God. The order was given. The John Doe was her responsibility now, and Clara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if she followed that order, the man would be dead before sunrise. She pushed the gurney toward the holding area, her mind racing. Burnt almonds, petechial hemorrhaging, a rapid decline in neurological function. The symptoms were disjointed, strange, but they were not random. They were a signature she had been trained to recognize under the most extreme duress. The scar on her temple throbbed, a ghost pain from a past she had tried to bury in the quiet misery of St. Jude's. She remembered a dusty afternoon in a forward operating base in Kandahar, a debriefing in a sweltering tent, a chemist in a hazmat suit showing them slides, talking about new threats on the battlefield. Not bombs, not bullets, but poisons. Silent, invisible killers. He had talked about an experimental organophosphate, a new generation of nerve agent. Its code name was Chimera. It produced a unique cascade of symptoms: tachycardia followed by a blood pressure crash, pinpoint petechial bruises, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent of burnt almonds on the victim's skin and clothes. Clara looked down at the John Doe, the athlete's build, the tactical, efficient way his muscles were formed, the scars on his knuckles. This was no junkie. This was a soldier, and he had been poisoned. Finch's order echoed in her mind. A sedative. That would be the worst possible thing. Chimera worked by overwhelming the central nervous system. A sedative would be like pouring gasoline on a fire, depressing his respiratory drive until he simply stopped breathing. Finch's ignorance and prejudice would kill him. There was only one antidote: a compound called pralidoxime K, a specialized formulation developed in secret. It was incredibly rare, astronomically expensive, and only stocked by major hospitals with government contracts for national security emergencies. St. Jude's had a small supply, kept under lock and key in the Level 5 secure pharmacy, a place no ordinary nurse could ever access. Clara wheeled the gurney not to the holding ward, but to an empty trauma bay at the far end of the ER, pulling the curtain shut. Privacy was a luxury, but for the next few minutes, it was a necessity. She had a choice to make. She could follow orders, she could let this man die, and her quiet, miserable life would continue uninterrupted. No one would ever know. It would be just another dead John Doe, another statistic. Or she could act. She could throw away the camouflage she had spent 2 years building. She could become the person she used to be, the person who ran toward the sound of the guns. She looked at the man's face, at the strength hidden beneath the injuries. He was a warrior. She knew it in her bones. And you don't leave a soldier behind. Ever. The decision was made. The quiet, mousy nurse was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Commander Clara Reed, call sign Angel, and she had a patient to save. She walked with calm, deliberate purpose toward the central nursing station. Maya was there, inputting data. "Maya, I need a favor," Clara said, her voice steady. Maya looked up, surprised by her direct tone. "Sure, Clara. What's up?" "There's a code blue on the 3rd floor, pediatrics. A kid just went into respiratory arrest. They're calling for all available hands. It's going to get chaotic." Maya's eyes went wide. "Oh my God. Okay." She stood up, ready to run. "Wait," Clara said, putting a hand on her arm. "It hasn't gone out over the general comms yet. They're trying to keep it contained. Go. They need you." It was a lie. A cold, calculated lie. But it would work. Maya trusted her. She bolted from the station and headed for the elevators, shouting for another nurse to follow her. In the ensuing confusion, Clara slipped behind the counter. Her fingers flew over the keyboard of the pharmacy access terminal. Finch thought she was an idiot, but she had a photographic memory. She had seen the senior pharmacist input the override codes once, months ago. Her mind flashed back to another keyboard, this one covered in sand, the screen glowing green in the dark of a C-130. Decrypting enemy comms. This was easier. The code was a string of 16 alphanumeric characters. She typed it from memory. Alpha, Kilo, 7, 7, Victor, 9, 0, Tango, Echo, 3, Bravo, Lima, 5, 5, Charlie, Foxtrot. Access granted. A green light blinked on the monitor, a quiet chime. The electronic lock on the Level 5 pharmacy door, 50 feet down the hall, had been disengaged for 60 seconds. She didn't run. Running drew attention. She walked, her pace brisk but not hurried. She passed Brenda, who was barking orders about the incoming crash victims. She passed 2 security guards jogging toward the elevators, responding to Maya's panicked and false alarm. The pharmacy door hissed open at her touch. The air inside was cold, sterile. She moved directly to the refrigerated national security locker. It required a second code, a personal one, a code she was never, ever supposed to use again. Her old service number. She typed it in. The locker clicked open. There it was. A small, reinforced case containing 3 vials of pralidoxime K. Each one was worth more than her annual salary. She took one. Just one. She closed the locker, closed the pharmacy door behind her, and walked back into the chaos of the ER. The entire operation had taken 47 seconds. Back in the trauma bay, the John Doe was getting worse. The monitor showed his heart rate spiking dangerously. She prepped the syringe with practiced, economical movements. No fumbling, no hesitation. This was what she was trained for. This was who she was. She found a vein in his arm, the skin cool and clammy. "This is going to feel like a lightning strike," she whispered to the unconscious man, "but you have to hold on." She pushed the plunger. The antidote flooded his system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, his entire body arched off the gurney in a violent convulsion. The monitor screamed, a flatline tone that cut through the air. He was in cardiac arrest. She didn't panic. She had seen this reaction before. The antidote worked by violently rebooting the nervous system. She slammed her fist down on his chest. A precordial thump. A desperate, old-school move. "Come on, soldier," she grunted, the words torn from her throat. "Fight!" She started compressions. Hard. Fast. The rhythm of it was burned into her soul. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. She worked with a ferocious intensity, a stark contrast to the timid nurse she had pretended to be. The flatline tone continued, a death knell in the small, curtained space. Suddenly, a ragged gasp. The man's chest heaved. The monitor sputtered back to life, a steady, strong rhythm appearing on the screen. His heart rate was stabilizing. His blood pressure was slowly starting to climb. The faint petechial bruises on his skin seemed to be receding, the color returning to his face. Clara sank back on her heels, breathing heavily, sweat beading on her forehead. She had done it. She had pulled him back from the brink. That was when the curtain was ripped aside. Dr. Alistair Finch stood there, his face a thunderous mask of rage. Behind him were 2 burly security guards. He had noticed the missing patient. He had seen the pharmacy access log. He had put the pieces together. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. His eyes flickered from the empty syringe on the floor to the stabilizing monitor, to the patient who should have been dying but was now, impossibly, getting better. "I saved his life," Clara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the fear he expected. She stood up, her posture straight, her eyes meeting his without flinching. The mask was gone. "You stole restricted medication. You disobeyed a direct order. You performed an unauthorized procedure on my patient," he roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You could have killed him." "You would have killed him," Clara corrected, her tone icy. "Your ignorance was about to kill him. He was exposed to a nerve agent. The sedative you ordered would have been a fatal interaction." Finch stared at her as if she had sprouted a second head. "A nerve agent? Are you insane? You are a delusional, dangerous woman. I've had enough of your fantasies." He jabbed a finger at her. "You're fired, Reed. Fired. Your nursing license is gone. I will personally see to it that you never work in a hospital, in any city, ever again. You are a menace." He turned to the guards. "Get her out of my hospital. Now. Escort her off the premises. And make sure she doesn't take anything else with her." The guards moved in, their expressions apologetic but firm. They were just doing their jobs. One of them took her by the arm. Clara didn't resist. She gave one last look at the patient on the gurney, now breathing steadily. She had done her part. He had a fighting chance now. They walked her through the ER. All eyes were on her. The whispers were no longer about her clumsiness. They were about her spectacular, career-ending downfall. Maya was standing by the nurse's station, her face pale, tears in her eyes. Brenda wouldn't even look at her. The guards pushed her through the automatic doors and out into the rain. It was cold, and the thin fabric of her scrubs was instantly soaked. They hadn't even let her get her jacket or her purse. She stood on the curb, watching the ambulance lights flash, the sounds of the ER fading behind her. Fired. Humiliated. Standing in a downpour with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had saved a life, and it had cost her everything. She started walking, the cold rain plastering her hair to her face, with nowhere to go. The roar started as a low thrum. A vibration felt more in the bones than in the ears. It grew rapidly, a percussive, ground-shaking thunder that drowned out the city noise. People on the street stopped, looking up at the bruised, rain-heavy sky. Clara paused, her hand shielding her eyes from the downpour. Two shapes tore through the low clouds. They weren't news choppers or police helicopters. They were black, sleek, and menacing. Sikorsky HH-60 Pavehawks. War machines. They moved with an aggressive, predatory grace that did not belong over the streets of a metropolis. Instead of heading for the hospital's rooftop helipad, they descended with terrifying speed toward the major intersection just in front of the ER entrance. Cars screeched to a halt, horns blaring in a cacophony of confusion and panic. The downdraft from the rotors blasted rain and debris in every direction, turning the street into a miniature hurricane. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered, inches from the asphalt, a breathtaking display of power and pilot skill. Side doors slid open, ropes dropped, and then they came. Figures clad in black tactical gear, night vision goggles flipped up on their helmets, rifles held at a low ready. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency, securing the intersection in seconds. On their arms, the unmistakable gold trident of the Navy SEALs. The lead team stormed the ER entrance, the automatic doors sliding open to admit a force that was utterly alien to the world of sterile corridors and beeping machines. The chaos inside the ER, so frantic moments before, froze into a stunned, collective silence. Doctors and nurses stood like statues, their mouths agape. Dr. Finch, who had been preening, recounting his dramatic dismissal of the unstable nurse to a group of residents, turned to face the intruders. His face, flush with victory, paled to a sickly white. The team leader, a tall man with a face like carved granite and captain's bars on his collar, strode directly toward him. His eyes, cold and analytical, swept the room before landing on Finch. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. This area is now under military control, by order of the Department of the Navy, he stated, his voice cutting through the silence. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. Finch, sputtering, found his voice. Who the hell do you think you are? This is my emergency room. I am the chief of medicine here. You can't just... The captain ignored him, as if he were a buzzing fly. He turned to the assembled staff, his gaze sweeping over their shocked faces. We are not here to cause harm. We are here for an asset, and we are looking for the person who saved him. We are looking for a nurse. A murmur went through the crowd. They all knew who he meant. Her name is Clara Reed, the captain continued. His eyes narrowed slightly. Though some of you might know her by another name. We're looking for Angel. The name hung in the air, meaningless to the ER staff, but it was a lightning bolt to the few who might have understood. Angel. A call sign. The pin on her uniform. The whispers about it being a toy died in their throats, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. While the drama unfolded in the ER, a black, unmarked sedan had detached from the military convoy and was cruising slowly down the street. Inside, a Navy liaison officer, a sharp-featured woman in a crisp service uniform, scanned the rain-swept sidewalks. Her eyes were sharp. There, she said to the driver. That's her. The car pulled up silently beside Clara, who was trudging through the downpour, shivering and lost in her own misery. The passenger window glided down. Lieutenant Commander Clara Reed? The officer asked, her voice professional and calm. Clara stopped, startled. She looked at the woman in the uniform, at the official government vehicle. The path she had run from had just caught up to her on a wet sidewalk. For a moment, she didn't respond. The name felt alien. Lieutenant Commander. It belonged to another woman, in another lifetime. The officer's expression softened slightly. It's all right. We've been looking for you. Master Chief Thorne is alive because of you. Your country needs you, Commander. The title, spoken with respect, broke the spell. Clara's shoulders, which had been slumped in defeat, straightened. The fog in her eyes cleared, replaced by a focused, analytical light. The training, buried deep, surged to the surface. She was no longer a fired, disgraced nurse. She was an officer of the United States Navy. She nodded once, her movements crisp, and got into the car. The liaison officer handed her a thick, dry Navy jacket. Put this on. Captain Decker is securing the asset now. Things are about to get complicated. Finch fired me, Clara stated, her voice flat. He ordered me to sedate Thorne. It would have killed him. We know, the liaison said grimly. We were monitoring Thorne's vitals remotely through a subcutaneous tracker. We saw his heart stop, and then we saw him stabilize. We knew it had to be you. There's no one else in this city who would recognize the symptoms of Chimera, let alone know the protocol for the antidote. The car made a swift U-turn and headed back toward the hospital. As they pulled up, the seals parted to let them through. Clara stepped out of the car, the oversized Navy jacket covering her drenched scrubs. She walked back into the ER she had been thrown out of just minutes before, but this time she was not alone. She was flanked by the liaison officer and two heavily armed SEALs. The entire ER staff stared as she entered. Finch, who had been arguing futilely with Captain Decker, turned. His jaw dropped. He looked at Clara, at her new military escort, at the jacket she wore, and a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief crossed his face. You, he stammered. What is the meaning of this? She works for me. Or she did. I fired her. She's a delusional, insubordinate. Captain Decker took a step forward, placing himself between Finch and Clara. He was a full foot taller than the doctor, a mountain of contained violence. He looked down at Finch with utter contempt. This woman, Decker said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, is Lieutenant Commander Clara Reed, one of the most decorated combat flight nurses in the history of naval special warfare. She has more confirmed saves in hostile territory than any other medic in the program. She is a national hero. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the full weight of Finch's catastrophic mistake crush him. The John Doe you tried to have discharged is Master Chief Petty Officer Cade Thorne, a Tier 1 operator whose life is of critical importance to the security of the United States. And you tried to kill him. Finch's face was ashen. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no words came out. The nurses who had laughed at Clara's pin now stared at it with a mixture of awe and terror. Decker turned his back on the doctor, dismissing him completely. He addressed Clara, his tone shifting from contempt to professional respect. Commander Reed, what is the patient's status? Clara's voice was clear and steady, ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her. I administered a full dose of pralidoxine K approximately 20 minutes ago. He went into cardiac arrest, which is an expected reaction. I initiated CPR and achieved return of spontaneous circulation. His vitals are stabilizing, but he's not out of the woods. He needs constant monitoring and supportive care, and he needs to be moved. This location is compromised. Decker nodded. I agree. He looked at Finch one last time. Dr. Finch, by the authority of the Department of the Navy under a presidential national security directive, you are hereby relieved of all command and authority within this hospital. Your access to this floor is revoked. Lieutenant Commander Reed is in full command of all medical operations concerning Master Chief Thorne. If you interfere in any way, my men will remove you. Am I clear? Finch could only nod, his body trembling, his world collapsing around him. The woman he had tormented, humiliated, and fired was now his superior. She had walked back in with the full force of the U.S. military at her back. And the look in her eyes was not one of triumph, but of cold, hard duty. The game had changed. Clara, flanked by Decker and his men, swept past the stunned doctor without a second glance. She was headed for the trauma bay where her patient was waiting. There was work to do. Inside the trauma bay, Master Chief Cade Thorne was awake. Barely. His eyes were open, slits of pained awareness in his bruised face. He watched as Clara entered, her presence now utterly transformed. She moved with the quiet confidence of a commander, her team of SEALs forming a perimeter around the room. She immediately went to his side, her fingers checking his pulse at the carotid artery. Her touch was firm, professional. "Master Chief Thorne, I'm Lieutenant Commander Reed. Can you hear me?" His voice was a dry rasp. "Heard them call you Angel." "That was a long time ago," she said, her focus on the monitors. "Your vitals are holding steady. The antidote is working. But it's not a cure. It just buys us time." She turned to Captain Decker. "The intelligence he's carrying, is it what I think it is?" Decker's face was grim. "It's worse. The Chimera nerve agent is real. The country that developed it is planning to sell it on the black market. Thorne's team was sent to intercept the lead scientist and the formula. The mission was compromised. They were ambushed. Cade is the only survivor." He gestured to Cade's abdomen. "He's not just carrying intelligence in his head. He's carrying the weapon's only known precursor sample. It's in a subdermal cryo implant in his abdominal wall. If the enemy gets their hands on him, they don't just get their scientists back. They get the key to mass-producing the agent." The stakes, already high, skyrocketed into the stratosphere. This wasn't just about saving one soldier's life. It was about preventing a global catastrophe. "Which means they'll be coming for him," Clara concluded, "and they'll know he's here." As if on cue, one of the SEALs guarding the hallway spoke into his comms. "Captain, we have a problem. Hospital security mainframe just went down. All camera feeds are dead." Clara and Decker exchanged a look. It wasn't a random glitch. It was deliberate. Meanwhile, in his now useless office, Alistair Finch was hyperventilating. His career was over. He was facing lawsuits, investigations, public ruin. His life was a smoldering crater. His personal cell phone vibrated. A blocked number. He answered it, his hand shaking. "Is it done?" a voice asked, smooth and accented. "No," Finch stammered. "There's a complication. The military is here. They've taken over." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This is not a complication, Doctor. This is a breach of your agreement. You were paid a handsome retainer to provide us with information and access. We were told this hospital was a soft target." The retainer had been a deposit of $200,000 into an offshore account, enough to cover a fraction of Finch's crippling investment debts. He had given a foreign intelligence agency floor plans, security shift schedules, and network vulnerabilities, thinking it was low-risk industrial espionage. He never imagined it would come to this. "I didn't know," he pleaded. "I didn't know who he was. What do you want me to do?" "You will fix this," the voice said, its tone turning to ice. "Our recovery team is already in position. You will create a diversion. You will get them to the asset. If you fail, your financial problems will be the very least of your worries. We know where you live, Doctor. We know where your children go to school." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Finch felt a terror that eclipsed even his professional ruin. He was trapped. He looked at a schematic of the hospital's backup power systems on his desk. He saw a way. A terrible, desperate way. "I'll do it," he whispered, sealing his fate. He hung up and with trembling fingers placed another call, this time to the hospital's maintenance chief, a man whose gambling debts Finch also happened to know about. Back in the trauma bay, Clara was working fast. "We need to move him, now," she said to Decker. "The longer we stay here, the bigger the target we become." "Agreed," Decker replied. "We have a primary exfil location, a fortified cabin, off-grid. My team is prepping him for transport." The SEALs were moving with practiced speed, attaching Cade to a portable monitoring unit and securing him to a tactical gurney designed for rough terrain. Clara was gathering essential medical supplies, her mind working 3 steps ahead. She needed more saline, backup doses of atropine, and a field surgical kit. Suddenly, the lights in the ER flickered and died. The entire floor was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of emergency exit signs. The steady beep of the monitors was replaced by a high-pitched, continuous alarm as the backup generators failed to kick in. "They've cut the power," one of the SEALs growled, flipping down his night vision goggles. The world turned a ghostly green. "Diversion," Clara said, her voice tight. "They're making their move." Through his goggles, the lead SEAL saw movement at the end of the hall. Figures dressed in the dark blue uniforms of the hospital's cleaning crew. But they weren't carrying mops. They were carrying suppressed firearms. "Contact! Hallway! North corridor!" he yelled. The assassins were professionals. They moved in silence, using the darkness and confusion to their advantage. 2 SEALs at the door laid down a base of suppressive fire, the muffled thump, thump, thump of their rifles echoing in the confined space. Clara didn't hesitate. Her training took over completely. She was no longer in a hospital. She was in the kill zone. She saw the reflection of an enemy combatant in the glass of a darkened medical cabinet. He was flanking them, coming in through an adjoining room. "Left side! Clear!" she shouted, her voice a commander's bark. There was no time for the SEALs to react. The assassin stepped into the room, his weapon raised, aimed directly at Cade's helpless form on the gurney. Clara reacted with blinding speed. She grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a solid steel 1-5 pole. In one fluid motion, she swung it like a baseball bat, connecting with the assassin's gun. The crack of metal on metal was followed by the man's cry of pain as the weapon was torn from his grasp. She didn't stop there. She reversed her grip, using the base of the heavy pole to drive forward, slamming it into the man's chest. He staggered back, gasping for air. Before he could recover, she moved in, her movements precise and brutal. A sharp elbow strike to the throat, a palm heel to the nose. It was a CQC takedown, taught in the grimmest corners of special operations training. The assassin crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The 2 SEALs who had just turned to engage the new threat stared in stunned silence for a fraction of a second. They had just witnessed a nurse take down a trained killer with an IV pole. Clara ignored them. She knelt, picked up the assassin's suppressed pistol, and expertly checked the magazine and chamber. The cold weight of it in her hand was sickeningly familiar. She took up a defensive position beside Cade's gurney. "Status report," Decker yelled over the sound of the firefight. "1 hostile down, inside the wire," a SEAL responded, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Angels got him." The firefight was short and brutal. The SEALs were better trained, better equipped. They neutralized the remaining assassins within a minute. But the message was clear. The hospital was a death trap. "That's it. We're bugging out," Decker commanded. "Pack it up. Go, go, go!" He looked at Clara, who was still holding the pistol, her eyes scanning the dark corridors for more threats. He saw not a nurse, but a warrior, awakened from a long slumber. He pointed to the tactical gurney Cade was on. "Finch put something on the frame, a magnetic tracker. Found it when we were strapping him in." Finch hadn't just created a diversion. He had tagged them. Decker crushed the small device under his boot. "They know we're on the move. We have to be fast." The escape was a blur of tactical precision. The SEALs formed a moving perimeter around the gurney, with Clara at its center, monitoring Cade's vitals on the portable unit, her other hand still holding the pistol. They moved through the darkened back corridors of the hospital, a ghost unit slipping through a building under siege. They emerged into the rain-swept chaos of the street, where their vehicles were waiting, engines running. They loaded Cade into the back of a modified armored van. Clara jumped in beside him, immediately reconnecting his IV. "Let's go," Decker yelled, jumping into the passenger seat. The van's tires squealed on the wet pavement as it peeled out, leaving the compromised hospital and the ruins of Alistair Finch's life behind them. They were heading for the mountains, into the storm, but they were not running. They were regrouping, and the enemy was right behind them. The cabin was less a cabin and more a miniature fortress nestled deep in the wooded slopes of the state park. It was a designated continuity of government site, built to be invisible and impregnable. As their small convoy pulled up the hidden access road, camouflaged steel shutters rolled back to reveal a reinforced garage. Inside, the space was Spartan but functional. A bank of communications equipment sat against one wall, a small but well-stocked armory against another. In the center was a medical bay that looked like it had been lifted directly from a naval warship. "Welcome to the doghouse," Decker said as his team swiftly moved Cade into the medical bay. "Secure comms, full-spectrum surveillance, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Or so we hope." Clara immediately went to work, hooking Cade up to the advanced monitoring system. His condition was still fragile. The antidote had stopped the nerve agent's progression, but his body had been through a massive trauma. "He's developing pulmonary edema," she announced, listening to his chest with a stethoscope. "His lungs are filling with fluid, a secondary effect of the agent's assault on his system. I need to intubate him." The SEALs, hardened warriors who had seen the worst of combat, watched in quiet respect as she transformed the bay into a critical care unit. Her hands were steady, her commands precise. She directed one of the team's medics, a man named Riggs, as if he were her resident. "Give me a size 7.5 tube, 10 cubic centimeter syringe for the cuff, laryngoscope with a Mach 3 blade." Riggs, who had performed field intubations under fire, moved to assist, but found himself a step behind her. She worked with an unearthly speed and confidence that left him in awe. In less than a minute, Cade was intubated and connected to a ventilator. The machine began to breathe for him, taking the strain off his failing lungs. "That should hold him," she said, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "But he's fighting a war on two fronts, the poison inside him and whatever's coming for us outside." "They're coming," Decker confirmed, pointing to a large monitor displaying a satellite map. A dozen red dots were converging on their position. They must have had a secondary tracker on one of the other vehicles, or Finch gave them our general heading. They're moving fast. The team began to fortify the cabin. They checked fields of fire, placed claymore mines along the perimeter, and loaded magazines. The quiet efficiency of their work was a grim prelude to violence. Clara, her primary medical task complete for the moment, found herself with a choice. She could stay in the med bay, a non-combatant, or she could fight. She walked to the armory, where Riggs was handing out rifles. He looked at her, then at the pistol still tucked into her waistband. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked, holding up an M4 carbine. Clara took the rifle from him. Her hands moved with an innate familiarity, checking the weight, the balance. She slapped the bolt release, chambered around, and flicked the selector switch from safe to semi-auto. The series of clicks was as natural to her as a heartbeat. "I do," she said, her voice low. She found a tactical vest and began fitting it over her scrubs. The weight of the ceramic plates was like a familiar hug. Decker watched her from across the room. "You don't have to do this, Commander. Your job is to keep him alive." "The best way to do that is to keep the enemy from getting through that door," she retorted, pulling the vest tight. "I can shoot, and I can heal. Today, it looks like I'll have to do both." The first explosion rocked the cabin just after dusk. A rocket-propelled grenade impacted the western wall, shaking the entire structure. The steel shutters held, but the fight had begun. The night erupted in a storm of gunfire. The mercenaries, a well-equipped and professional force, launched a coordinated assault. Tracers zipped through the trees, cutting green and red lines in the darkness. Clara took up a position near the medbay, giving her a view of the main entrance and a direct line of sight to Cade. She knelt by a reinforced window slit, the M4 resting on the sill. She wasn't a SEAL, not a frontline operator, but she had qualified expert on every weapon in the naval inventory. She had spent countless hours on rifle ranges, her instructors marveling at her calm precision. Her first shot was a revelation. She acquired a target, a mercenary moving between trees, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she saw him drop. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just a calm, lethal efficiency. She was saving lives by taking them, a grim paradox of her existence. The siege raged for hours. The SEALs were outnumbered 3-1, but they were in a fortified position, and they were the best in the world. They fought with a cold, brutal professionalism, calling out targets, coordinating their fire. And in their midst was Clara, a guardian angel armed with a rifle, moving between her patient and her firing position. At one point, a bullet punched through the wall near the medbay, shattering a monitoring screen. Clara rushed to Cade's side, shielding his body with her own as she checked his lines. The ventilator was still working. He was stable. She returned to the window, her jaw set, a cold fury in her eyes. The mercenaries grew desperate. They concentrated their fire on the main door, using heavy machine guns to chew through the outer layers of steel. "They're going to breach!" Decker yelled. "Fall back to the medbay. It's the most secure point." The SEALs fell back, forming a tight semicircle around Clara and Cade. The sound of grinding metal at the main entrance was deafening. With a final, groaning tear, the door was ripped from its hinges. The enemy poured in. The fighting was close quarters, a maelstrom of muzzle flashes and shouting. The SEALs held their ground, but they were taking casualties. Riggs went down, a round to his leg. Another SEAL was hit in the shoulder. Clara, under fire, dragged Riggs behind cover and immediately applied a tourniquet to his leg, her medical skills as sharp as her combat instincts. She handed him a fresh magazine for his sidearm. "Stay in the fight," she ordered. The mercenary leader, a huge man with a scarred face, finally broke through the line, his eyes locked on Cade's gurney. He saw his prize. He raised his rifle to finish the job. Decker lunged at him, but was knocked aside. The other SEALs were pinned down. It was down to Clara. She dropped her rifle. It was empty. The mercenary leader smiled, a cruel, triumphant grin. He had won. But Clara wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the defibrillator machine beside Cade's bed. She had been preparing it in case Cade's heart gave out again. Her mind saw a different use for it. "Clear!" she screamed. As the mercenary took another step forward, she grabbed the defibrillator paddles. She didn't put them on Cade. She spun, jamming them against the mercenary's chest, directly over his heart. She hit the discharge button. 360 joules of electricity surged through the man's body. His eyes went wide in shock, his muscles seizing in a violent, uncontrollable spasm. He let out a choked scream as his rifle clattered to the floor. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, smoke faintly rising from the scorch marks on his tactical vest. In the stunned silence that followed, a new sound emerged. Sirens. The cavalry had arrived. State police and federal tactical teams, guided by the SEALs' emergency beacon, were swarming the area. The remaining mercenaries, their leader down and their assault broken, dropped their weapons and surrendered. The siege was over. Clara stood amidst the smoke and carnage, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the defibrillator paddle still clutched in her hands. She looked at the unconscious mercenary leader, at the wounded SEALs, at Cade, who was still breathing, still alive. She had held the line. As dawn broke, a different kind of battle was beginning. Back in the city, Dr. Alistair Finch stood before a hastily assembled bank of news cameras in the lobby of St. Jude's. He had scrubbed up, put on a fresh lab coat, and composed his face into a mask of grave concern. He was taking control of the narrative. "Last night," he began, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "this hospital was subjected to an unprecedented and violent attack by what we can only describe as a rogue military faction, aided by a deeply disturbed and unstable former nurse, Clara Reed." He painted a picture of chaos, of a deranged woman with military delusions who had endangered a patient and brought a firefight into his hospital. He was the hero, the steady hand who had tried to maintain order in the face of madness. He spoke of her history of instability, her insubordination, her violent tendencies. "I was forced to terminate her employment to protect our patients," he said, a tear welling in his eye. It was a decision that, tragically, came too late to prevent this horrific event. We pray for a swift resolution and for the safety of all involved. The reporters were eating it up, scribbling furiously, broadcasting his lies live to the world. He was winning. He was turning his treason into a story of heroism. It was at that moment that the main doors of the hospital lobby burst open. The reporters turned as one. A hush fell over the room. Framed in the doorway stood Captain Decker and the Navy liaison officer. Between them, walking slowly but with undeniable strength, was Master Chief Cade Thorne, dressed in his formal service uniform, his chest a constellation of medals. And beside him, her head held high, was Clara Reed. She had traded her blood-stained scrubs for a crisp, borrowed Navy uniform, the rank of lieutenant commander shining on her collar. Her hair was down, framing a face that was no longer mousy or timid, but strong and resolute. The scar on her temple was visible, not as a mark of shame, but as a badge of honor. They walked through the parted sea of reporters and stopped directly in front of the podium. Finch stared at them, his face turning the color of ash. He saw Cade Thorne, alive and well. He saw Clara, not in disgrace, but in uniform, a figure of authority. His carefully constructed world of lies evaporated in an instant. Decker stepped up to the microphones, pushing a stunned Finch aside. He didn't need to raise his voice. His words were like chips of ice. "Dr. Alistair Finch is a traitor," he said, the statement landing like a physical blow. He is not a hero. He is a paid informant for a hostile foreign power. He held up a small digital recorder. What you are about to hear is a recording of Dr. Finch accepting money to facilitate the abduction and murder of a United States naval officer on American soil. He pressed play. Finch's voice filled the lobby, panicked and greedy, agreeing to the terms, agreeing to help the enemy. "I'll do it," his recorded voice whispered. Decker then gestured to a large screen on the wall, which flickered to life. It showed security footage from a hidden camera the SEALs had placed. It showed Finch on his phone. It showed him using a maintenance terminal to disable the hospital's power grid. It showed him planting the tracker on the gurney. "The leader of the mercenary team that attacked my men, under the pay of the same people who paid Dr. Finch, has given a full and complete confession," Decker continued, his voice cold as a grave. "He has confirmed that Dr. Finch provided the intelligence and the diversion that led to the attack on this hospital." Finch's face collapsed. The mask of civility shattered, revealing the pathetic, terrified man beneath. "Lies! It's all lies!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "They're framing me! She's a lunatic! I was trying to save everyone!" No one was listening. Two men in dark suits with FBI credentials stepped forward from the crowd. "Alistair Finch," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and espionage." They snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. The clicking sound was the punctuation mark on the end of his life. He began to weep, to scream about his innocence, about how they couldn't do this to him. He was a doctor. He was important. He was dragged away, a pathetic, sobbing wreck, his cries echoing in the silent, cavernous lobby. The camera flashes, which had, moments before, been feasting on his downfall, now turned like a school of fish. They all focused on one person: Clara. In the back of the crowd, Maya, the young intern, started to clap. It was a hesitant, solitary sound at first. Then Brenda, the weary senior nurse, joined in. Then another nurse, and a doctor, and then the entire room erupted in a thunderous, sustained ovation. They were applauding the woman they had scorned, the hero they had been too blind to see. Clara stood tall, letting the wave of sound wash over her. It wasn't about the applause. It was about the truth. She looked over at Cade, who gave her a slow, respectful nod. Vindicated. A few days later, Clara sat in a sterile conference room at a naval base. Across the table sat Captain Decker and a man with the stars of an admiral on his collar. "Lieutenant Commander Reed," the admiral began, his voice a low baritone. "The President sends his personal gratitude. What you did at St. Jude's, and what you did at that cabin, was extraordinary. You saved Master Chief Thorne's life twice, and you prevented a weapon of mass destruction from falling into the hands of our enemies. Your country is in your debt." Clara simply nodded. "I did my duty, sir." "You did more than that," Decker interjected. "You demonstrated a unique skill set. Elite medical expertise combined with top-tier combat instincts. A combination that, frankly, we have rarely seen. It's too valuable to waste." The Admiral slid a file across the table. The cover was stamped, "Top Secret." "We've been developing a new kind of unit. A small, rapid-response medical team, fully integrated with Special Operations Forces. Designed to deploy into the most hostile environments in the world to extract, treat, and retrieve high-value assets under extreme duress. The project has been on the drawing board for years, but we've never found the right person to lead it." He paused, his eyes locking on hers. "The project's codename is Angel. We want you to command it. You will build your team from the ground up. You will write the protocols. You will be its first commander." It was not a job offer. It was a calling. It was the chance to be the person she was meant to be, without hiding, without camouflage. The chance to turn the skills forged in trauma into a shield for others. "I accept, sir," she said without hesitation. The final scene was not in a hospital. It was on the windy tarmac of a military airfield. The air smelled of jet fuel and freedom. Clara was no longer in scrubs or a formal uniform. She wore a graphite gray flight suit, the fabric crisp and new. On her shoulder was a new patch, one she had designed herself. A guardian angel with a rifle in one hand and a caduceus in the other, set against the backdrop of a black trident. Her hair was pulled back in a practical, efficient ponytail. The scar on her temple was no longer something she tried to hide behind her hair. It was just a part of her, a line in the map of her life. Leaning against the side of a waiting Pavehawk helicopter was Master Chief Cade Thorne. He was out of his dress uniform and in tactical gear. He was smiling, a genuine, easy smile that transformed his battered face. He was the first member of her new team's dedicated security detail. He walked over to her, his stride confident and strong. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small, gleaming metal badge, a custom version of her old flight nurse pin, but rendered in polished silver and black. "Figured you needed an upgrade," he said, his voice warm. "Welcome back, Commander." Clara took the pin. It was cool and solid in her hand, a symbol not of a past she had to hide, but of a future she would command. She looked from the pin to Cade's smiling face, to the waiting helicopter. She smiled back, a real, confident smile that reached her eyes. "Good to be back, Master Chief," she said. She turned and walked toward the helicopter, the wind catching her hair, her new badge gleaming in the sun. She was no longer running. She was flying. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Clara Reed teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. Just because someone appears quiet or unassuming does not mean they are weak or incompetent. True strength and skill often lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It also shows that arrogance and cruelty, like that of Dr. Finch, ultimately lead to ruin. His ego blinded him to the truth and made him underestimate the very person who had the knowledge to save a life. In the end, doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is its own reward. Clara risked her career and her freedom to save a man's life because it was her duty, and that act of courage led to her ultimate vindication. True strength is not about status or power, but about character and integrity. Never judge a book by its cover, because you might just be looking at a hero in disguise. What would you have done if you were in Clara's position? Would you have followed the doctor's orders to protect your job, or would you have risked it all to do what you knew was right? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We have more inspiring stories coming your way. Have a nice rest of your day.